I wonder, does anybody here have a standing Christmas present? And by that I mean, is there something that you love so much that everybody in your family knows how much you love it and knows that every Christmas they need to get you something that fits in that category? I'll be honest and say that for me, it's Legos. And yes, I turned 28 this year, and you better believe that there was a Lego Star Wars Resistance bomber underneath the Christmas tree when I got to my parents' house on Christmas Day. Now, the older I get, the more I marvel at the beauty of engineering and manufacturing that goes into producing these tiny little bricks, the way they fit together so neatly. But when I was a child, the thing that first drew me to this lifelong love of Legos was the ability to build worlds. Give me a tub of plastic bricks and a lazy Saturday afternoon, and by the end of the day, I could have very easily created an entire city populated with all kinds of people, each with little bits of backstory and jobs and tasks to do. Or if not a city, a castle town, or a futuristic moon base, or my own version of any of the dozens of film properties that LEGO has the rights to merchandise. Now, it may not be quite the same as a lazy afternoon spent with a bucket of bricks, but in a very similar way, Psalm 1 is a world-building psalm. As the opening salvo in the final canonical version of the book of Psalms, this individual poem both shapes and prepares us for everything that is coming afterwards. It sets the stage. It builds the world within which all other 149 psalms live and move and make any kind of sense. Psalm 1 has what my professor Brent Strawn calls definitional and constitutive power. Now, when considering the kind of world built by Psalm 1, it can be very easy for us to get bogged down in the dualism of its rhetoric. After all, my own Bible puts the heading, "the two ways," right there at the top of the psalm, as though this distinction that the psalm makes between the righteous and the wicked is the most important thing that's going on within these verses. Now, the distinction is important, make no mistake, but if we focus too much on the distinction, we run the risk of losing the even deeper truth of this world the psalm is building, the truth that lies just underneath everything else. And what is it that lies beneath everything in this psalm? Why, it's the very law of the Lord. In Hebrew, the Torah of God. It undergirds everything in this psalm and everything in the rest of the Psalter. Psalms of praise are written to the God who has made such a good world, founded upon this law. Psalms of lament are written in protest when the world founded on this law seems out of whack. Wisdom psalms are written to illuminate the order of such a world, just out of sight, just beneath the surface of everything in this poem. Underneath our feet, the world is built upon the Torah of God. We should not, by the way, interpret that word Torah literally. Though the psalmist no doubt knew about the law of Moses and the 5 books that bear his name, there's no evidence that this passage wants us to imagine just the law. Rather, Torah should be understood in its broadest possible definition as teaching, guidance, wisdom, instruction. The source of all life, the very thing which undergirds all of reality and makes all the Psalms possible, is the wisdom and guidance and teaching of God. And this, by the way, is what makes the tree metaphor in this psalm so powerful. The trees are said to prosper and bear fruit, but it's why they prosper and bear fruit that is so interesting. They are able to prosper and bear fruit because they have been graciously transplanted into soil where their roots can expand and grow deep, go beneath the surface, and come into contact with the source of all life. The righteous, this psalm insists, are successful and fruitful not of themselves, but because they are constantly open to receiving the instruction of God wherever and whenever they find it. What matters for them is not the fruit itself, but that they are rooted deeply in the Torah of God, which undergirds all of reality. The wicked, on the other hand, are disconnected from that source, and that's what makes their condition so painful. Lacking those roots and that connection, they shrivel and die, lacking strong ties to the reality of this world. They are blown about like leaves on the wind, carried to and fro by any politician or preacher who promises to give them roots, only to be disappointed over and over again. In many ways, the psalm imagines that the life and the existence of the wicked is kind of its own punishment, cursed as they are to wander separated from the root of this world. Because they do not know the Torah of God, the psalm says, they do not stand in the judgment or in the congregation of the righteous. Except they do, don't they? Maybe it has something to do with my ever-expanding political consciousness, or maybe it's just the way things actually are, but 2017 sure felt like a year when the wicked got to stand in judgment and in the congregation of the righteous. I don't have to tell you that ugly and violent nationalism looms as white supremacists and Nazis march openly in cities all across this country. I don't have to tell you about this administration's brinkmanship and jingoism and tweeting, which threatens to engulf the entire world in the fires of nuclear war. I don't have to tell you what it feels like to see another terrorist attack pop up in your news feeds or another tragedy blaze across Facebook. I don't have to tell you that millions of people, including the Rohingya Muslims of Myanmar, roam the world as refugees, seeking only a place to call home. And as I look back across 2017, it sure seems like a world wherein the wicked get to stand in judgment. But of all things, my least favorite subject from seminary, Hebrew grammar, has the potential to resolve this quandary. You see, in English, at least in the NRSV anyway, the Hebrew verb kum is rendered as a simple future verb. The wicked will not stand in the congregation of the righteous. But if I've conjugated this correctly, and somebody will surely tell me if I haven't, the verb in Hebrew is actually an imperfect verb, which indicates incompleted action. The wicked will not stand in judgment, but the will not part of the verb is not yet complete. This verb, in many ways, and this feels weird to say out loud, it's a verb of protest. The wicked are not supposed to stand in judgment. The wicked are not supposed to be in control of things. The rootless forces of sin and evil are not supposed to call the shots in the world, because the world is founded upon the very Torah of God. Everything about this world is founded upon the swirling mystery of the power and wisdom of God, and only the things which are in touch with that wisdom have the power to last. So the wicked may stand in judgment now. The forces of sin and evil may indeed roam across the surface of this creation and stand in the congregation of the righteous, but they don't know what's underneath. They don't know what this world is founded upon. They don't know what C.S. Lewis's Aslan called the deep magic. The hope of Psalm 1 and our hope for whatever might be in 2018, even when we cannot see it, even when we can barely imagine it, is for all of us to remember what this world is built upon, what we ourselves rest upon, the wisdom and guidance and justice and teaching of God hidden just beneath the surface, holding all of us up and moving all of this creation toward God's good end. Speaking of the deep beneath us reminds me of an interesting event that occurred just about 20 years ago off the southwest coast of Great Britain. In 1997, a bizarre weather pattern created a wave that struck a cargo ship just off the coast, and 62 of the ship's cargo containers were lost at sea in a part of the North Atlantic that's so deep and so cold that nobody ever bothered to really figure out what had happened to them. And one of those cargo containers contained over 5 million tiny Lego bricks bound for the North American market. And as that cargo container floated down into the depths of the North Atlantic, something happened to it. It broke open. And from the frigid, dark, icy depths of the North Atlantic Ocean, some of those bricks began to bubble up to the surface. And if you go to Wales or to Cornwall, on certain beaches, you can still find, 20 years later, tiny little Lego octopuses drifting up from the North Atlantic and coming up onto the beach in the southwest of Great Britain. So way down deep, underneath the ocean, that container is still there. Nobody knows exactly how it got there. We don't even fully understand the ocean currents that cause those pieces to come back, because they really only come back to the southwest coast of Britain. But bubbling up 20 years later from the cold and the dark is something that reminds us of the mysterious and powerful world underneath. Friends, I know what the world looks like. I know that 2017 was not a banner year for justice and righteousness, and I know that 2018 doesn't look much better. But I also know what lies beneath us. Swirling under the surface, even when we cannot see it, even when we can barely imagine it, is the Torah of God. And every once in a while, sometimes when we least expect it, in places that we never thought it would be, something, maybe even just a tiny brick, pops up from underneath, reminding us that something far bigger and far more primal is at work right beneath us. Perhaps for you, that brick might be the kindness of a stranger. Perhaps it's the throng of voices raised in protest at a Black Lives Matter march. Perhaps it's reconciliation with a distant family member or a reconnection with a long-lost friend. Whatever it is, notice it. Pick it up. Take it home. Put it on your bookshelf. And notice how it connects you to the swirling mystery that holds all of us up. Let me leave you with the words of the great prophet and poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries. May 2018 be the year that we notice what lies beneath us. Amen.